Hello, time travelers, and welcome, new time travelers. As always, if you're new to this channel and enjoy learning about history, one event at a time, then don't forget to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into it. Today we're going to start out in 1415 when Czech religious reformer Jan Hus, who criticisms of the church participated in the Reformation by more than a century, was burned at the stake for heresy. 1535 is when English humanist and statesman Thomas More was beheaded for refusing to accept King Henry the Eighth as head of the Church of England. 1777 is when British General John Burgoyne captured Fort Ticonderoga from the Americans during the American Revolution. 1885 is when Louis Pasteur successfully tested an anti-rabies vaccine. Moving on to 1907, when Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, noted for her intense, brilliant, colored self-portraits, was born. 12 years later, in 1919, the British dirigible R-34 lands in New York after an 108-hour voyage, completing the first crossing of the Atlantic by an airship. 9 years later, in 1929, is when the first full-length, all-talking motion pictures, Lights of New York, premiered in New York City. I read part of this next book, or the book in the next event. Anne Frank and her family went into hiding in Amsterdam on this day in 1942 and lived in a secret annex. An experience documented in her diary, which became a classic of war literature until her capture on August 4th, 1944. 1946 is when businessman and politician George W. Bush, who served as the 43rd President of the United States, was born. 11 years later, in 1957, with her defeat by Darlene Hard, American Althea Gibson became the first black tennis player to win the Wimbledon single champion. 1957 also brought us Paul McCartney meeting John Lennon for the first time at a church event in Liverpool, England, where the latter's band was performing. The duo would later form the Beatles, perhaps the most influential band in history. 1964 is when Nyasaland broke from British rule and became the independent country of Maui within the Commonwealth of Nations. 1988 is when the Israeli 405 bus slaughter, in which 14 bus passengers were killed as an Arab assaulted the bus driver as the bus was driving by the edge of a cliff. 1995 is when Bosnia Serb forces began to attack on Srebrenica, Bosnia and Herzegovina, ultimately killing more than 7,000 Bosnian Muslims, boys and men. The massacre was the worst episode of mass murder in Europe since World War II. 2 years after the turn of the century, we get two events. In 2002, John Frankenheimer, who was considered one of the most creatively gifted directors of the 1950s and 60s, especially noted for such classic movies as The Manchurian Candidate, which premiered in 1962, and Birdman of Alcatraz, of also the same year, died in Los Angeles. I've seen a little bit of Birdman of Alcatraz. Anyway, 2002 is also when American tennis player Serena Williams defeated her sister Venus to win her first Wimbledon singles title. Oh, that other one is actually a tennis player. Duh. Did not put two and two together. Okay. And finally, in 2002, during the African Union Summit in Addis, Alabama, President Theodoro Obiang Nguema Mbogo of Equatorial Guinea and President Omar Bongo of Gabon agrees to conduct joint explorations for oil in Curaçao Bay while UN mediators decide on border dispute in the bay. And with that, we return to 2024 and our current history. Until next time.